Thanks, Scott Shannon. Welcome aboard. Glad you're with us. 800-941-SEAN, our toll-free number. You want to be a part of the program, your front row seat. The battle for the heart and soul of America going on right now. And we told you about this court decision out of Virginia. Big news of the day. Federal District Court, Henry Hudson striking down the Obama administration's health reform law, saying health care law ruled unconstitutional. Now, it's interesting he said that because Governor-elect South Carolina, Nikki Haley, challenged President Obama over the health care law late last week in an exchange in front of cabinet members and newly elected governors from across the country. In the exchange, well, I'll let Governor-elect Haley tell us herself. Governor-elect, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on the show.
By the way, great victory for you. I mean, this was... you know what? They threw everything in the kitchen sink at you on top of everything else, and you still prevailed, and I really give you a lot of credit for standing strong.
Well, it motivated me, because the more they threw at me, the more motivated I was on fighting for the people and trying to prove that that's why we need real people in office and get the establishment out. So it was a great win for the people. It was a great win for South Carolina, and hopefully we'll continue to watch it cross the country as we go forward.
Well, tell us what happened with you and President Obama.
Well, there were actually a couple of exchanges. First of all, I give him credit to the fact that he had the new governors come in. He pretty much opened for an exchange between all of us. Nothing was off limits. And so I used that opportunity to let him know that the federal mandate that he had put in place was going to be detrimental to our states, particularly South Carolina. You know, it was increasing deficit spending. It was increasing mandates that we couldn't afford. Our state's already in a budget crisis, and basically asked him if he would consider repealing the law and admitting that it was a mistake. And he said at that point that as long as he was president, he was not going to repeal it. And then I went further and said, well, you know, if that's the case, then would you allow states to opt out if we gave you a solution? And he said, yes. He said, if you can provide me a solution that would allow for pooling, that would deal with pre-existing conditions, and that would create a state exchange, then I will consider allowing you to opt out. So at this point, you know, I met with my federal delegation today, and I told them to continue the fight against the mandate. I'm going to continue to support my Attorney General on the fact that I think this is an infringement of rights of the people, and then I'm also going to go and see what options we have so that should it come the other way around, we still are deciding the state of South Carolina on our own, as opposed to having the federal government decide that for us.
Let me go through this with you again. He said that he's not going to repeal it as long as he's president, but he may not have a choice based on this court ruling today. But putting that aside, but he'd consider letting states opt out if its mandates if they ran exchange programs, banned insurance firms from denying coverage for pre-existing conditions, enabled people to pool together for better rates. Well, what would be the difference then between that and Obamacare? Is it just the mandate issue then?
Well, the only thing I would push for is, you know, we want a private approach, a market-based approach. That's what I want to be able to provide for the people of South Carolina is options, so that we can actually provide health care to more at a less price, but not an individual mandate is the key. And so, you know, it certainly was an opening. You know, I'm not one to ever play victim to the process. My fight to go on fighting for that repeal of that law will continue. Secondly, I think that this governors need to step up and say, okay, if he's going to continue to push this on us, it's up to us to try and find a solution to get our states to opt out in some way. So now it's up to me and the brain powers that be here in South Carolina to try and figure out ways that we can make sure that we create options that are, you know, private sector oriented, create more options, and allow it to be something that's not so expensive on our state.
Why do I doubt at the end of the day, because I support medical savings accounts, for example, where people can build up an account, it's their money, and they'd have access to it at some point in their life, because most people don't use a lot of medical care until they get older, but they'd have catastrophic insurance if they ever faced a heart attack or cancer or something, bad accident or whatever. So I support those. Why do I not think that Obama meant that in his answer?
Well, you know, I think that we don't know, but what I will tell you is when I go back to him with a solution, if he says, no, this isn't good enough, then we can say, look, you said that if we followed this rule that you would allow it to go forward, so now you're going back on your word. You know, my goal was to sit there and push him as far as I could on the fact that this is a terrible mandate on our states. It's a terrible mandate on the rights and freedoms of the people, and if you are going to continue this, then allow states to have solutions. And, you know, initially my solutions were allow us to pass tort reform, where we cap non-medical damages and we reform our Medicaid process, and we make sure that we handle things on our own by incentivizing small businesses to offer health care. That would have been my initial solution. That wasn't good enough for him. So if he's given us some sort of basis to work on, I'll do that. But at the end of the day, I think that the ruling that we saw in Virginia was a great ruling for us. It goes back to the fact that this is not what our founding fathers intended. This was not what they intended with the Commerce Clause, and I think that we need to make sure that the states are able to decide what's best for them. We don't need the federal government deciding things for us.
What are some of the other things that you discussed? You said there were a number of other issues you had an opportunity to speak with him about.
Yes, I also talked to him about our situation with Yucca Mountain. South Carolina was, the nuclear waste that we collect here was supposed to be sent to Yucca Mountain, and during the election of Harry Reid, all of a sudden the commitment that had been in the works for years, that South Carolina taxpayers had paid $1.2 billion in, was basically pulled out from under us. And they said that they were no longer going to allow us the option of Yucca Mountain. And so I asked him if he would consider opening that back up. He said no, and then at that point I said, well, give us our money back.
And what did he say?
He said that he would have Secretary Chu call me, in which he did. He called me that night, and I told Secretary Chu the same thing. I said, to simplify this down, if I were to go into a store and buy a product and order it, if it didn't come in, they would give me a refund. And he said, well, we're working on a commission. We're trying to figure out some other options for South Carolina. And I said, well, what's your timeline? He said 2012, and I said, you know what, give me my money back, and in 2012, when you have a solution, come back to me.
And how did that go over?
It didn't go over too well. I think we're going to be talking to some attorneys.
That's pretty funny. Any other exchanges you had, or? What was your general feeling about it? I mean, believe it or not, Governor-elect, and we're speaking with Nikki Haley, the Governor-elect of South Carolina, but, every media person was invited to the White House media Christmas party except me. I mean, can you believe he does? I didn't even get an invitation. Can you believe that?
Consider that a badge of honor.
I even think Bill O'Reilly got an invitation. Crying out loud.
Well, I think that this was, first of all, I commend anybody for having an open exchange. So I appreciated that. But I do think that it is the role of governors that as we are losing faith in Congress, it is up to governors to step up and really show what good policy looks like. Really go back to the basics of what the role of government was supposed to be. I have said many times that government was intended to secure the rights and freedoms of the people. It was never intended to be all things to all people. And as we look at what they're dealing with the tax issue, as we look at health care, as we look at these things like Yucca Mountain, we are seeing mandate after mandate. And what I want to remind my fellow Republicans is this last election was not about Republicans. It was about conservatives. And, again, as they're taking on that tax policy today, that is an increase in taxes. That's an increase in spending. It defies exactly what the voters said they wanted in this last election. This is not the time we need to compromise. This is the time where we can really push it and say, let's go back to what we need to be doing. They're basically looking at a way to create an incentive for people to die by December 31st. It's a terrible thing.
Isn't that unbelievable?
And so,
you pay your whole life paying taxes,
Yeah, you pay taxes all your life, and now, you're going to turn around, you're going to tax them when they die. You're increasing the deficit by more than $200 billion in spending. That totally flies in the face of what the voters said in November. And all these new congressmen that went in there, all these new governors that went in there, I feel empowered. I feel strong. I know exactly what the people want from me, and I think that it's time for the people in Washington to see that. I think it's time for all elected officials to remember who it is that they work for, and I applaud the people across the country who have shown the power of their voice, and this is the time where they need to pick up the phone and call their elected officials and say, remember who it is you work for.
Let me ask you, but general perceptions of the president, I hear from my White House sources that he's not quite as engaged and he's a little detached. He's definitely irritated that he did not want to go along with any extension of the Bush tax cuts. The election that took place forced him to do it. Even though they haven't been able to work out the details of this. I guess we'll take it up to December 31st before we actually know, but who knows. Did you get that feeling being around him?
Yes, he was definitely discouraged. He was not, I think there was some defeat there. He certainly walked in the door and said, I'm a proud Democrat. And, I see a couple of Democrats in here, and I'm not going to lie, I wish there were more of you. He was walking into a room of a lot of Republican governors. And I think that he realized and saw what the rest of the country was this was a wave of people saying we don't like the direction our country is going in. We don't want stimulus packages. We don't want bailouts. We don't want mandates, and we don't want tax increases.
You know, I listen to you, and you're just such a solid, articulate, common-sense conservative. Two governors in particular have really impressed me, and one is Bob McDonnell of Virginia, and obviously Governor Chris Christie has done a great job standing up to a very liberal, legislature and liberal media and liberal press in New Jersey, and he's done a great job. But Bob McDonnell went back to 2006 spending levels. The new Congress is promising to go back to 2008 levels. How are you going to deal with finances in your state?
Oh, it's such an incredible opportunity because while you go through the toughest times, you can make the best decisions. We are going to go into every agency and say, what do you have to have? And work our way up. This is a great time to look at federal spending on a state level. A lot of times our states take federal dollars just because it's there, even though it distracts them from the mission of that agency or the mission of government. This is the time to make our states more independent, step away from that federal spending that has tied our hands for too long. Look at our agencies and say, are we really doing what the taxpayers want us to do? And make these an opportunity. I'm excited about the challenge in front of us. Look, we're looking at a 20% shortfall in South Carolina. But I am not going to whine or complain about that. I am thankful for the opportunity for us to take the role of government back to the people and go back to the basics. This is a great time, and if we don't take advantage of this, shame on us, because that is what that's what the taxpayers elected us to do. I think it's time for us to show results.
What do you think of the deal in Congress on the tax deal? Do you think there's too much spending in it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's $200 billion more in spending. And, the make or break for me right now is we have tax policy in place. So to me, you can call it an extension or not. This is a tax increase. To go in and put that death tax back in is a horrible backwards move. It's just terrible.
So if you were advising Republicans, would you say to them, forget this deal, forget the new spending, demand an up or down vote on increasing the taxes, on the death tax and everything else, and take all extraneous spending and put it aside? And
they need to absolutely split the question. They need to split the question and take one vote on taxes, and then they can take one vote on spending. I want to know who is for increasing the death tax, because you can't be, enough of saying you're Republican. I've been disheartened with both parties. If you are conservative, if you are truly conservative, it is a terrible thing to turn around and say, we are going to go and create this incentive for you to die. I mean, it's absolutely unconscionable that they're thinking about that. This is tax policy as it is. It is current tax policy. When we are in a tough economy, the last thing you do is raise taxes. So this is really going to define who the conservatives are. Whether they were newly elected or they've been there forever, this is a time where the taxpayers of our country really need to watch what our elected officials do.
In the last hour, I mentioned an AP article that says they're adding all these other, pork projects, ethanol, and a bunch of other projects. The AP reported, and my estimate is about $55 billion more dollars than the $200 billion you mentioned. And as I was saying it, Senator McConnell's office said, no, it's not going to be in the bill.
It's unacceptable because if you look at the fact that the election said we don't want to increase taxes, this does. They said in the election we don't want to increase spending, and this does. It just is, it's defying everything that the taxpayers said they wanted. We actually have the upper hand right now. We proved it in the elections in November. So I don't understand why they're taking a step backwards and compromising. This is not the time to compromise. This is the time to say that there was a mandate, that people said that they want to take their country back, that they want to control their government again. They did not ask for a compromise. They did not ask for increased spending or tax increases, and I think that this is exactly what has messed us up in the past, is we sit there and we look at the election wins, but we don't look at what happens when the people get in office. I've said we no longer elect people because they look good in a picture or hold a baby well. We have to hold their feet to the fire. We've got to make sure they're fighting for us. And if they're not, we let them go. And this is a perfect example of where they can show that November meant something, and that means they don't compromise.
I got to tell you something, Governor. Listening to you and seeing governors like Bobby Jindal and Bob McDonnell and Haley Barbour, and then looking at the Senate with, people like Marco Rubio and Rand Paul moving in there, and people in the House like Kristi Noem from South Dakota and other. I got to tell you, it's refreshing to hear people like yourself in positions of power articulate conservatism so well. So we're going to follow this closely, and we really do appreciate your time, Governor, and I hope you'll come back on when you're finally sworn in.
Well, and it's always a pleasure, and I just remind all your listeners to remember that government was intended to work for the people, not the other way around. They really need to pick up the phone and call any elected official on these issues. It matters. If ever there was a time for them to feel the power of their voice, it's definitely right now.
All right, Governor-elect Nikki Haley on the Sean Hannity Show. Thanks for being with us.
Great. Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
All right.